Hey, folks, it is the 9th of February, and today we're going to continue our lecture on the Cold War. And just as a reminder, today you have to do your study island assignment. Now, if you're one of those, I think there's only like one person out there who's unable to sign in right now because we're having some account issues. You don't have to worry about it, but everyone else, make sure you get it in by the end of today. So, otherwise, it's late. But first, we're going to go over some of this information first. And if you'll remember, Cold War notes can be found within the Google Classroom. And I have it there as a PDF to help you find out. So we left off last time. We were talking about the expansion of the Cold War. And so the Cold War is in a way a world war because it's happening everywhere. But at the same time, it's not major nations fighting each other. It's more or less you have these, you have small wars, things we call color revolutions as well, where it's been essentially espionage and spy networks help overthrow governments through various means. Yeah, go ahead. And stuff like that. So remember when we were talking yesterday, or gosh, it was last week, we were talking about how Cuba was taken over by Fidel Castro, and they installed a communist government, which is going to be very worrisome to the Americans because, because there's potential for nuclear disaster. So this is a picture from a U-2 spy plane. So this is a plane that's able to go up into Earth's upper atmospheres and take very highly detailed photographs of the Earth's surface. And when we made these, we made them under the impression that they could fly so high that they were impossible to shoot down. Unfortunately, the Russians are going to shoot one of these down, and they're going to accuse us of spying on them illegally, which could be seen as an act of war. And so, oops, kind of messed it up. But as you can see, like this is like from the 50s, and they're able to get like these beautiful photographs, even back then, before you had like digital or a lot of today's technology. Color photographs still weren't quite, like color TV wasn't quite normal for too many people as of yet. So Cold War expands. Meanwhile, Eisenhower, remember Eisenhower was the president during this time. He's the president who's going to, he was the general during World War II in the European campaign, the lead general. He's going to come in after Truman, and he's going to take command. Eisenhower committed U.S. bombers and air resources to Indochina, which is the old term for Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. So in order to aid the French in their conflict with the Viet Minh communists, led by a guy called Ho Chi Minh. And so here's the thing. So you have this region southwest of China that's trying to get independence because the French, as part of the French Empire, because a lot of those European countries had empires, ruled over this area. And so you would have things like essentially French plantation owners who would live there, and they were kind of like upper society. But a lot of these people were getting thrown out of the country because these people wanted their own government. And unfortunately, though, a lot of the movement for their own government was under people under communist ideology. The French are going to fight in this region at first, and it's not going to be good. A lot of it's going to be very nasty guerrilla warfare. Eisenhower wants to help out our friends and fight communism, but he does not want to send land troops. He sees that as a bad idea. He sees Vietnam as having no possible path to victory. And so he also felt that if we got involved there, the rest of the region, possibly China, would get involved. And in some ways, he's right. The Russians are going to do a lot to help out the Vietnamese. As Eisenhower was negotiating with the Soviets on arms reduction deal, like let's start limiting how many nuclear weapons we have so we don't accidentally destroy the earth, right? sounds good. He's like, hey, let's start getting rid of some of these things. We'll get rid of some of ours. If you get rid of some of yours, and we won't be so mean. Well, unfortunately, that's when one of our spy planes was shot down by the Russians. And they're like, hey, this was illegally flying over our country and taking pictures of our stuff. Why would you do that unless you're going to do something bad? So the Soviets' new leader, a guy called Nikita Khrushchev, showed the world the pictures of the plane's wreckage, along with the captured pilot. So the pilot lived, he parachuted out, and he was a prisoner. Yeah, they made a movie. Tom Hanks, I think, was in a movie.
Yeah, like we weren't interfering doing anything. We were just like, was it like how to test flight?
No, this wasn't a test flight. This wasn't a test flight.
Like there was maybe taking pictures, at least whatever you said.
Yeah, he was. So yeah, he's flying way high up above the earth and taking these photos.
Took it down.
Yeah, and they shot it down.
They shot it down.
Yeah, so like this happens sometimes. Kind of like I remember one time we lost one of our stealth bombers. I think over Bosnia in the '90s, and they were supposed to be like impossible to detect, and shoot down.
Is it like the one with the flat belly, like the?
Well, it's kind of like a W shape.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. It's like a weird W shape on the bottom. Yeah, those they shot it down using like really crude, like old school Russian technology and stuff. We're like, oops. No. So that happens sometimes. All right, so Khrushchev is going to show the world pictures, and the Russians then withdrew from the conference as the world feared nuclear war was to follow. So here we're having peace talks. Like, hey, let's start getting rid of some of our weapons. We can be friendly, you can be friendly. And then the Russians were like, you tricked us. Look at this. We're not going to talk to you anymore. And so the world was like, oh, shoot. Are they going to start shooting at each other now? And so it was one of those many periods during the Cold War where we thought it could get close to a nuclear holocaust, maybe, because when tensions are high, sometimes people make mistakes and wars happen. And so that's like a big part of anxiety. And Europe was scared because they were next door to to Russia. Sorry, they were next door to Russia. And they knew that the Russians' battle plans were, both sides wanted to avoid nukes if possible, but the Russians believed that their best chance for victory was to overrun Europe and then from there somehow fight off the United States. It's one of the reasons why we kept so many military bases in places like Germany and stuff like that. So we're kind of scared, like, oh shoot, are we going to do it now? Ready to move on? All right, let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, so back to the home front. So during this time period, you can see a lot of what we call like middle class culture start coming up in America. And so you start having shows like Lassie, Leave It to Beaver, and stuff like that start coming up in the United States. I forgot her name, but like Leave It to Beaver is actually based on like a book series from this author who would write books, like early reader books for small kids. And he was just like one of the characters.
It's hot in here.
Is it? Man, just can't do right in here. It's either too hot or too cold. Earlier during lunch, I wanted to put my coat on. I think probably Mr. Brand or somebody went through and just flicked it on, because it's got a timer. It's like 4 or 5 hours something. Turn it on, it'll turn off to save energy. I don't know. But, sorry, just kind of think cool thoughts. All right. All right, changes in America. Though the 1950s had been a time of existential anxiety. So existential anxiety, wow, big words. So we're talking about like people are just worried about could everything come to the end? What if all of civilization, we have all this history of all of our cultures and religions and societies, and what if we just turned it all into ashes? Oops. What if we just like as human beings, we made it to like this super technology point and we just destroyed ourselves before we could go any further? So people were worried about that. So despite that, America was a relatively prosperous period for many Americans. Of course, not everybody. Of course not. We're going to talk a bit about that when we get to the civil rights parts. So despite half of the U.S. budget, it's like federal government's money, going towards national security, like the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, stuff like that, in 1955, Much of this money flowed into colleges and industries for what we call R&D. That's research and development. So the government at this time was helping to fund a lot of research. And a lot of this research was for the sake of us being defended against the Russians, but some of it was also for space exploration. And you would get things like that have to do with technology that could help out everyday Americans. Large corporations ballooned. Salaries increased by nearly 50% on average. And for the first time in U.S. history, white-collar jobs outnumbered blue-collar jobs. And so a white-collar job is a job where they generally say you kind of work with your brain. You don't break a sweat. You're not lifting heavy things or working with your hands. Blue-collar jobs the other way around. That's where you are working with your hands or your back.
Factory.
Yeah, factory work,
Farming.
construction. I'm sorry, what?
Farming.
Yeah,
So it's the
farming.
exact opposite, like the people that didn't do too much like labor, like they got paid more.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Usually because white collar jobs require more training, right? It could be like college. You're supposed to get compensated more. And the reason is because you're supposed to be more rare. So like back then, somebody with a college degree was rare. Right now, there's a lot more people with degrees, right? And we're actually finding that it's going the other way around. We're having less and less people who can do some blue skill jobs, like electricians and plumbers, welders and stuff like that. That's what they get
A
paid
lot of
with.
them are not, didn't really go to college.
Yeah, a lot of them don't go to college. Yeah, it's true. There are some white collar jobs that do very well without going to college, like networkers, programmers, computer
If you're an
skills.
electrician, do you have to go to college to be an electrician?
Well, electric engineering, yes, but to be a licensed electrician, I don't believe you have to go to college for that, but it can help out. There's certain fields to where you can go to college and you will spend your time in your degree learning things that have nothing to do with your job. Like I was talking about, like computer programmers or networkers, right? Guys who make computer internet work essentially, and internal networks. If you go to school to get a computer science degree, it's almost all math based. It's basically like having mathematician and electronic engineering put together with a little computer stuff, a little programming and stuff. If you want to be a programmer, you don't need any of that stuff. You learn a language, you kind of like an artist, you build up what's called a portfolio of things you made, and then you start applying for jobs and showing them what you made. And they'll hire you based on that. Things like networking, they want you to have certifications, but you don't go to school for that. You get that book to study it, and then you take the test. So it's certification test.
And electricians and welders to go to a trade school.
Yeah, you can go to trade school for that. I mean, you can do, like TJC has programs for that. But you don't have to go for like a 4-year degree or something.
There's a 2.
Well, there's 2, 4, and 6, and 8. And then, but the thing is, it's like that can vary. You can get a 4-year degree in 3 years.
Yeah, the 8 years that's the
PhD or it can go on longer than that too. It depends on what you're doing. If you're doing something like in the sciences, you might have to go longer. If you're doing something in medicine, it's going to be for longer than that probably.
And to be a master tradesman requires more experience than like education.
Yeah,
While in colleges, it's all about education, not actual experience.
yeah, it's true. It's true. If you want to be like a master pipe fitter or something like that, you'll work for one of the really big oil companies, but you want, like you have to spend a lot of years, you have to take a lot of tests and stuff, but you don't need any school to do it. So, but then you got job instability. You got to pick the right field, because if it's oil, as I'm sure you know, sometimes it does well and sometimes it doesn't. So, all right, back to this. So, church attendance rose to its highest point in America in 1953. More families moved into suburban homes with automatic appliances and plastic products. So like this is where you see like the rise of what you might call like the suburbs, right? So like people used to have to live in the cities if they wanted a good paying job for the most part, because you had to live pretty close to public transportation or to the factory or the office. But now that more and more cities are being built for cars, you can take your personal car and move out to a place with other houses, a suburb that's within driving distance. You can get away from the city, move in a place that, like you can kind of pick the house and stuff like that. So yeah, like you start seeing changes. You start seeing what we see today, cities with the suburbs on the outside and stuff like that start getting bigger and bigger. In 1950, around 9% of homes had televisions. By 1960, it was 90%. So just over 10 years, you're seeing more transformations within America. So yeah, sure, people have been listening to the radio for a while, but now they're watching TV, and they're watching it a lot. And when they're watching TV more, they're going to the theaters less. Almost everybody has a car now. More and more people are starting to move into single-family homes. And by doing that, you have less and less people who are living in multi-generational homes than they used to. Because it used to be throughout America, almost everybody would live with a house with grandparents, parents, then, the kids. Now you had more of those people getting their own homes and stuff, like you see a bit more now today. So yeah, things are changing up, kind of moving away from some of our rural agricultural roots. Right, so hey, there we go. Sitting outside the Supreme Court, and newspaper headline says, "High Court bans segregation in public schools." So, like I said, things weren't perfect for everybody. So yeah, like the national average economically, materially, leisure time, bless you, people were doing a lot better. But, if you're a part of a certain group, like a minority group, maybe it wouldn't do all that well for you. So, but there's going to be attempts to change that. So it is Black History Month. So it's only appropriate that we talk about the Civil Rights Movement. Bless you some more. All right. So despite the overall economic improvement in America, there was still a racial divide due to segregation. And so segregation is one of those funny things. It's because usually when we talk about segregation in school, we're usually talking about just the separation between white and black, like Anglos and African Americans, right? But it's different in different places because you could still find segregation amongst other racial groups in other areas. Like if you're in Los Angeles, there's a section of town where people of Asian background, especially predominantly Japanese, were expected to live and stay. If it was, say, San Antonio had certain parts of town and certain schools where only Hispanics were allowed to go. And then you had the white part of town. So it wasn't just all African American and white people. Though that is what's going to be in the spotlight. And a lot of the reason why it's in the spotlight is because of the aftermath of the Civil War and Reconstruction. You have those old Jim Crow laws that were really race-based, and they were literally put in place to keep black people down. So, despite the overall economic America, there was still a racial divide due to segregation. Throughout most of America, segregation and discrimination. So segregation is where you separate people. Remember, separate but equal, as we talked about earlier in the year. So the Supreme Court, if you remember back in the day, said that public facilities must be the same for everyone, but you can separate it based on race if you want to. That's why you had 2 water fountains, 2 bathrooms, stuff like that in restaurants and hotels and stuff. And throughout most of America, this is what we call de facto. And so de facto is Latin. It means as a matter of fact. It's just how people lived. In the North, you had segregation. In the West, like I said, California, you had segregation and discrimination. But it wasn't on the law books. People just did it, right? So you would have things like what we call redlining. So where It's like I was saying, like California. Some people be like, huh, there's like a family from, I don't know, Africa trying to move in our neighborhood. So what do? You just make sure the real estate company doesn't sell to anybody from that part of the world. And so it's not a law, but still people are doing something racist to keep people out of their neighborhood. And in the South, you had it differently though. In the South, as the old institution of Jim Crow left the regional segregation and discrimination as de jure. So that means by law. So that means like in the South, it was by law. They had law saying black people cannot ride on the front of the bus. White and black kids could not go to the same school. So it was legal things, right? So like the society in the South was saying, this is our law, so you can't do that. Whereas throughout most of America, they're just like, well, no, we just don't hang out with people like you know. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education that separation must be equal, but in fact, it was not equal. So they're going to say that because it's been, that separate but equal was in fact not equal. So what they're saying is that the schools were lopsided. At first, whenever you had the institution of schools for newly freed slaves, a lot of them actually wanted segregation because they were scared that their former white owners would pick the teachers and take control of the schools and not let them be parents for their own kids. But it turned out what happened though wasn't good for them because the states, the counties, and the towns and the school districts would give all the good books and the new things to the white school and not to the black or the Hispanic school, right? And so one would have materials that was super old, nasty desks, one-room schools with hardly any heating and stuff like that. And the other was much nicer and state-of-the-art. And so they're like, this isn't equal at all. And so they said, you have to end this. The court declared that schools had to integrate. That means all races coming together with all deliberate speed. Well, that's kind of vague. It's like, what's all deliberate speed? For some people, it meant 50 years. And for some, it meant right away. But gave little guidance on how to do so, as the courts were never intended to be a legislative body. So the courts could rule if something was constitutional or unconstitutional, legal or illegal. But at this time, they didn't say how to do things. They're like, that's Congress's job. They figure it out. We said it's illegal. Congress must fix it. That's not going to change for a while. Desegregation took the spotlight in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. And so we're going to see how that works out a few years later. And so, I remember I was at the Veterans Hospital in Dallas like years ago. I was visiting I had to go to an oncology appointment. And there was an old black dude in front of me. And he was like, hey, how you doing? I was like, hey, how you doing? I was like he found out I was a history teacher. He was a retired history teacher. And his first couple of years teaching was in the Tyler area, but he taught history at one of the black schools. And he taught during integration. And he said pretty crazy, like when the schools had to start coming together, because he was just like, he didn't go into details, but he was just like he was happy to talk about it, but he said it was just crazy, everybody's reactions and stuff like that. Because like some places like Tyler didn't integrate until after the 50s. I'm not sure when Tyler did it, but there's some places that didn't finish integration until the 70s. And so you would still have some places that had like white only schools and stuff like that in the 60s and stuff. So it kept going on for a while. And a lot of people were scared of it. Like a lot of people, they say ignorance breeds racism. So a lot of these people were very ignorant and they thought that their kids were in danger somehow going to school with people of other races. So there was protest and all that kinds of stuff. So it goes to show, if you don't want somebody to be like prejudiced to somebody, you got to kind of expose them to people, you got to have them around one another. Otherwise, they're going to just kind of get scared. And then fear makes people hate. All right, let's do one more, kids. All right, so. Hey, here you go. Once again, paratroopers saving the day. So that's the 101st Airborne. They're in Little Rock, Arkansas, leading a group of black high school kids known as the Arkansas Nine, or the Little Rock Nine, I'm sorry. And they're going to have to stay there for a full school year to make sure these kids can finish high school without getting hurt, essentially. So they had to go there for their safety. So thankfully, President Eisenhower had the wherewithal to use his presidential authority to protect kids. All right, so let's see how that worked out. In 1957, Little Rock, Arkansas, sought to integrate a high school, despite the state's governor sending the National Guard to prevent it. So, like, that's the deal, right? So, the National Guard ordinarily is under the control of a state's governor. Every state has a governor. So the governor can call their National Guard to do things, usually like maybe some non-arresting police action, filling up sandbags before flood, helping out people like in a national emergency or like, after a tornado or something like that, right? But the president can take control of them if he wants to. So he's using his National Guard to keep kids out of school because he doesn't want black and white kids going to school together. As 9 students attempted to attend class, throngs of angry parents and these National Guard troops prevented the kids from entering the building. In one incident, and so they were trying over and over, the students had to flee for their lives from an angry mob. Eisenhower responded by nationalizing Arkansas's National Guard, sending them home. He's like, go away. And then he sent in full-time soldiers, the 101st Airborne, to protect the students all year. So he's like, all right, we'll get rid of you, Arkansas National Guard people. Y'all go home. And I'm going to send in my full-time troops, paratroopers in, to go keep the kids safe. In 1955, Montgomery, Alabama, a seamstress named Rosa Parks made headlines by refusing to move to the back of the bus for a white passenger. So once again, this is in the South, and we have bus laws where whenever a white passenger wanted to sit up front, the white people had to move in the back. She was like, I don't want to do that. And so she got in trouble for that and arrested. Despite threats of violence, blacks boycotted the city's buses and were urged on by the preaching of a guy called Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And so before this, we've actually already had in Montgomery, Alabama, which was seen as kind of like the focal point for Jim Crow laws. The police were known as being rather mean to African Americans. They had a lot of Ku Klux Klan people down there and stuff. And so you had civil rights organizers start focusing on like that. This is the place where maybe we can make some change and get national attention. And Martin Luther King Jr. was one of those people because of his intelligence and his powerful speaking ability to be one of the leaders of this movement. And when we come back on Thursday, we'll talk more about that. All right, kids. So make sure you finish your study island. If you can't get into it, email me right now. All right. Talk to you later. All right. And for those who are here, if you could please make sure you finish that assignment.